Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we are going to get into what makes us happy. So this is probably a continuation of last week. We talked a lot about gratitude and how gratitude can definitely help increase your happiness. So we're going to force some happiness on you. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But we are going to talk about happiness. I thought it would be fun to mix things up a little bit and talk about some things that bring Mark and I true joy. So, we've each come up with 5 things individually that bring us true joy, that just make us happy. But before we do that, we're going to get into a couple of things. Like, we're going to talk about where happiness comes from, right? So, why are we happy? Why is happy an emotion?
Why is it an emotion? That's a good question. I think that, as we've talked about before, emotions give us information about what's going on in the world around us and how it affects us. And so, we did a podcast, I don't know how long ago, that was totally on emotions, talking about, for instance, it's easy to see, say, anger. If you're feeling angry, then and you're having that emotion, then it's really important to understand, okay, what is it that's causing this emotion in me, and what can I do about it? So if you ask the question about, well, why is happiness an emotion or joy? I think that could it be, I don't know, saying it's the opposite of the anger, because what you're doing is you're experiencing something that is truly making you feel good.
Yeah.
Or joyful or happy. And so I think what the idea is, well, I'm going to search out more of that, whatever that particular thing is. So again, it's giving you information about how you interact with the world around you, the people around you. Does this feel good or does it not feel good? I think that's kind of the main role of emotion. So it's information. I think it's telling us how we are doing in the world.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And so I think it would be, a good time. I often take the phrase beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And I add something besides
Which
beauty.
I think is true.
Yes.
True.
Well, but so I've said before, truth is in the eyes of the beholder, right? And I think happiness is in the eyes of the beholder. So, what makes one person happy may make another person really angry. So, happy really is subjective.
But you referenced a survey.
Yes.
The Ipsos survey,
yes.
which I don't know if you're going to link it for our listeners to look at.
I will.
But what's interesting is when you look at the survey, there are very common things that make people happy. And a lot of the things that I'm going to, certainly the 5 things that I'm going to talk about, I think all but one of them is is referenced in that survey.
Yeah.
So what it is that makes us happy tends to be universal.
Right.
There are some things that are universal across the cultures. That because this was how many different countries? 30, 23? I can't remember.
How many? 30 countries.
30 across 30 countries. And the interesting thing about this survey, I don't know if you noticed this, it was taken during the height of the pandemic in 2021.
Oh,
and so there are some references to health, which physical health, which wasn't in my list of things, but it certainly is. In fact, my physical health and well-being is the number one thing on this. It is, and it says sources of happiness in the COVID era. So I wonder if they did this because we were in that lockdown. A lot of countries were in the lockdown.
Yeah.
And so the number one thing at that time, I'd be curious to know if it's changed, moving out of the pandemic. But at that time, it was the number one thing. Number 2 was mental health.
Because mental health was another big deal during the COVID, during the pandemic. So I thought it was interesting that the happiest countries of all that they surveyed, the happiest countries were the Netherlands and Australia.
So I was curious about that. I've only been to I've been to the Netherlands a couple of times,
Hmm.
and my youngest son lived there for several years. So in some ways, it makes sense. Now, my daughter, who's a physician, would say that a big part of that happiness is going to be universal health care. And I don't want to get into a
Yeah.
political discussion,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but when you don't have to worry about health care,
Hmm.
then that can be a great source of happiness. And they don't worry about healthcare over there, even for my son, who,
Interesting. Yeah.
who wasn't a citizen, he was visiting there. If you're sick, you go to the doctor, and I mean, you pay a little bit. But then also, I was trying to figure out what is it that makes them happy.
Hmm.
Do you know that I think this has got to be a part of it? Most of that population is riding bikes all the time. Now, this is going to
Oh, okay.
I mean, they have special lanes for bikes set aside for
Hmm.
bikes all over. You have to be really mindful, not necessarily of the cars, but of the bikes,
Okay.
because they come racing along just like
Hmm.
cars. But so you have people who are physically active outdoors all year long
Mm.
and riding bikes. And so I thought that might be interesting to you because you're very into bike riding. But I think that physical activity has got to be part of it.
I agree. And, and politics aside, right? You do
Hmm.
make a good point about healthcare. And I think it really just comes down to, the stress around healthcare and the stress
Right,
around finances, right?
right.
So in this survey, I thought it was really interesting. It says
There's
each,
one about more money. Is that the one you're?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So some other sources of happiness stand out as being particularly important in just one or a handful of countries. So France, or their personal financial situation, was the top
Uh-huh.
five in France. And
Well,
so I thought that was interesting.
yeah.
I think,
If you think about money, there's this saying, money can't buy happiness, which I think ultimately is probably true. But I think what it does, if you have the more money you have, and I'm talking about in our country, then
yeah,
you don't have to worry about making the choice between can I take my kids to the doctor when they're sick or can I feed them this week?
yes,
And that is truly the choice that a lot of people have to make because they
hmm,
don't have enough money. And
yeah,
so the more money, what it tends to do is decrease your anxiety and stress,
yes, yeah,
which then leads to more happiness, or you can experience life in a happier way. So the
hmm,
money part makes sense to me, not because it decreases stress.
yes. And so that I can certainly see. And I'd also be interested to see what the poverty rate is in the Netherlands? Like how many people live in poverty? Because I think the poverty rate in the US is probably high compared
Yeah,
to a lot of developed countries, you
I
know.
think it is, and I think that one of the biggest differences, say, between our country and some of those more socialistic European countries, is that the wealth divide is pretty big here. I mean,
Yeah.
because through the pandemic, there are a good percentage of the population in our country did really, really well economically, and
Hmm.
then a big percentage of the population did very poorly, and
Yeah.
so you have this split. And I think that in a lot of those countries, like I think for education, say, education in our country, there's a huge again, this goes into the political realm, but which we don't need but to go into, but
Hmm.
student debt or college debt, and
Yeah.
I think in those countries they don't have that because
Hmm.
it's not financed the same, and so that's why I think that there's a better social support network is what it
Yeah.
amounts to in those countries.
Yeah. And that makes sense to me, I mean, and regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, and we're not trying to make this a political
Right?
thing,
No.
but I mean, there are these just, I guess, just commonalities or these underlying factors that
Right.
still go into happiness.
Yeah. And so at least the happiness survey that came out recently, often the Scandinavian countries like Sweden, I'm looking at this, is like number 5, at least in this one.
Hmm.
The Scandinavian countries often come out very high. And again, there's a better social support network that goes on there than here. And
Yeah.
but although United States was, what are they, 10th? It's not, I mean, they're high. They're higher than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's an interesting study just to see what's important to people.
Yeah, it
No,
was.
here's the one that was interesting. Being recognized as a successful person. Important
Interesting.
in
Yeah.
India and Turkey.
Hmm.
The amount of free time I have, Japan and South Korea. This part that's what I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, and I think different countries place different. I mean,
Right.
it's a cultural thing, right? So different
Yeah.
cultures
Yeah.
value different things.
Right. So here's again from the study, finding someone to be with.
Mm,
Really important in China, Germany, Japan, and Russia.
yeah.
So that
Yep.
connection. So you're right
Hmm.
about that.
Yeah.
Referencing China, it's about finding a connection with a significant other.
Hmm.
What that is.
Yeah.
So here's really interesting. Here, this is the ranking: Netherlands, Australia,
Hmm.
China. Now, that's surprising to me.
Yeah.
Great Britain, India, Saudi Arabia. Again, interesting.
Yeah.
France, Canada, Sweden, and then the United States.
Okay. So I mean, we're not terribly low, but if you look
No,
at but if you look at places that are lower, so, I mean, Turkey and Argentina, I think that there is probably a lot of poverty
right.
in those
Well,
countries.
I mean, Argentina. I don't know what their inflation rate is. It's like
Yeah.
10,000% or something. I mean, to
Yeah.
buy a loaf of bread, you take a stack of bills. So life is really hard there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that that makes sense to me. And then Mexico is also, I mean, it's not as low as I would
Hmm.
expect because, my understanding is that it can be, well, I think there's a reason why we have so many immigrants trying to get
Hmm.
to America and risking so
Right.
much because I think Mexico is also, it can be a very dangerous and rough place to live in.
But
So,
also in Mexico, I mean, there's similarities between Mexico and the U.S. in that there's a huge divide in the wealth.
mm, yeah,
There's a big portion of the population that's very wealthy, and then a huge portion that's very poor.
yeah. So going back to this list of things that, or think kind of universal things that make people happy, pretty high up there is, yeah, a relationship with your partner or your spouse,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So that is something that people can derive great happiness from. I also
Yeah.
think too, though, that can also create a lot of unhappiness. That can also be a major source of unhappiness. So, and Mark, you and I both believe that long-term relationships are really what make us happy. But man,
Right.
if your marriage is struggling, it can make your life a living hell.
Very unhappy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the children was in there and then feeling that my life has meaning. So, I
Yeah.
think having,
Purpose or yeah, meaning. Hmm.
yeah, yeah, purpose. And so for me, feeling that my life has meaning and I get a lot of meaning from being a mom. I feel very, very fulfilled in my role as a mother and I have for many, many years. Well, since I became a mom. And, I think Curtis feels the same way. I mean, so his job, he doesn't hate his job, but he doesn't love his job. He's very comfortable and confident in his job, but it's not like he loves what he does. But he's
Hmm.
very, very driven in his job and he does it very well. And he's driven to succeed because he's so motivated by his family.
Hmm.
And he
Yeah.
said that it's his family that really pushes him to be successful. And he is. He's worked incredibly hard in his career and he is incredibly successful and he's proven himself invaluable to almost every company that he's worked for. So, I think family is probably got to be the highest up there. I think physical and mental well-being were definitely a COVID era, but I, like you, I'd be interested to see if maybe family is
Well,
higher up there
family is the
now.
next one. So if you look
It is.
down at,
Yeah.
so number one, number two, and then at least during the COVID era, it was relationships.
Yeah.
Number three was relationships right underneath there.
I wonder if maybe people were feeling less happy about relationships because, well, they were just stuck with them all the time.
Well, I certainly saw that.
You did.
Couples fit. And what's interesting, I don't know how we're 24, so we're, 2 to 3 years outside of the
Yeah.
kind of the hard pandemic era. And I still see couples who spend way too much time together.
Yeah.
And some couples can do that, others cannot do that at all. Uh,
and neither one of them is a bad thing, right?
no, no,
There's nothing. Yeah,
I think you just have to know, you
yeah.
know, what it is, and there's nothing wrong with getting space
No,
from
yeah.
from
There
your
is.
partner, and I think a lot of people need that. But then also, if you get along well 24/7, then fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Curtis started working remote before the pandemic. So he got his remote job in 2018. And I
Hmm.
remember being worried that we were going to get sick of it, that we would get sick of being around each other all the time. And we never did.
Yeah,
So the pandemic didn't really change. Well, it didn't change much of our relationship. It was definitely a challenge doing school from home. It changed a lot for me.
right. Yeah,
But
yeah, it does. Hard.
our relationship didn't alter very much because we were already used to being together all the time. And but that was something that I found that I really liked, that I really enjoy.
Hmm.
So I guess I'll start with then,
Okay.
something that brings me true happiness and true joy is my relationship with Curtis. I mean, just the security that I have and the interdependence that we have on each other, that it really brings me true joy. And, I think that the interesting thing about something that brings you true joy is it often has the biggest capacity to bring you unhappiness or the biggest capacity for pain. And,
Yeah.
you know, thankfully, Curtis and I, we have a very healthy, good marriage, but I mean, all good and healthy marriages have conflict. So, I guess that's maybe a bit of a catch 22 is yes, it's my greatest source of joy, but it can be my greatest source of angst when there is conflict. But thankfully, we also have a pretty good method of working through conflict. I feel like we're pretty good at that.
Yeah. Well, that was my number one. I mean, it's very similar,
Yeah.
although I listed it more as family relationships because
Hmm.
certainly with Lindy, but my four kids, and so when the kids were I younger, focus on them, and I can truly say that I really like each one of my kids for who they
Hmm.
are.
Hmm.
And then, 11 years ago when we had grandchildren, so our focus, I mean, it's still focused on the kids, but really it shifted to our grandchildren. I think I mentioned Lindy and I spend at least 2 days a week
Hmm.
with the grandchildren and often more. So we'll have them tomorrow after school, and then we'll see the whole family will be at our house on Saturday night for Caitlin's birthday, plus her grandparents from San Diego. So family is really important. Here's an example, and I don't know why this gave me this joy. Is that so? Sierra has these. I think I've mentioned my daughter Sierra has these. She got these two dogs at the same time, but they
Hmm.
turned out to be gigantic. I mean, these are the biggest dogs. She didn't know that because they're just mutts, but they're
Hmm.
the biggest dogs I've ever seen. And so she said, "Hey, I'd love to have a doghouse." And she was asking me and one of my sons to build a doghouse. So, we built this doghouse in one day, and so we took it over. It's kind of big,
Hmm.
and so we assembled it on her concrete patio because that was easiest. But we couldn't move it. I mean, because
Mm.
this thing is huge. So
Yeah.
we just organized on Monday, and all the kids showed up, and one of the spouses showed up, and it took 5 minutes, but everybody showed. I'm really lucky because all my kids and grandkids live here,
Hmm.
and that wasn't
Yeah.
always the case.
Hmm.
All my children at one time have lived outside of the state of Utah,
Yeah.
but then over time they've all come back, and so it was just it gave me a lot of joy.
That's
Everybody comes together, 5 minutes. That's
hmm
it. We move the doghouse, and then everybody goes on about their day. But what I can't remember when Adrian said this. I think she brought her kids to a musical program for Mallory. They
mm.
go to different schools, and she said we show up for family.
Yes.
So
Yep.
so family. So I
Hmm.
lumped them all together.
Hmm. So, I mean, and I guess I don't know. I probably could lump. I mean, I had them separate. I had so my relationship with Curtis, and then I have my kids, right?
Hmm.
Almost as kind of a separate one. And
Hmm.
maybe I have them separate because my kids bring me true joy, but they also are my greatest source of frustration
Well,
because
yeah, but that's
because
you're in that phase. See, I'm
yes.
not in that phase anymore.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Oh, hi. Speaking of
and speaking of family,
children, family.
hello.
Hi, honey. Okay, what you doing? Oh, you just got home. Oh, okay, that's right. You had Young Women's tonight.
Yeah, I drew a nine-tailed fox that you can't really see.
Nice. Okay.
I gotta stop for a,
Okay.
a, a quick second.
Very good. Okay. How did you have fun at Young Women's?
Yeah, we
Okay.
did s'mores, but I really didn't roast a s'more. I just ate one of them.
Nice.
Got again. We had varieties of cookies, and I had one of each of those cookies and one marshmallow.
Nice. Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you had so much fun. Okay. All right. I love you. Go get ready for bed. Okay.
So that is so appropriate. Here we're talking about families, and your
Yep.
daughter comes and
Yes.
says hi to you.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Well, right.
so
Well, I mean,
it's too bad our listeners can't. I mean, you may edit that out. But you
yeah.
may also they can't see it. I mean, it was just so appropriate right then.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and like I said, or like you said, I'm in that phase of life where my
You
kids
are
are
very much.
young, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Thank you.
but moments like that are just knowing, I guess it's knowing that I'm the one that my kids want to come to, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
she was so excited to get in the door and
Yeah.
come tell me about her evening. And so that brings me true joy. That brings me pure joy.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your next one?
So my next one, nature. I don't know that the rest are in any order. Being out in nature, and Lindy and I very consciously set up our life to be out in nature. Where we live up a canyon. It's called Immigration Canyon in Salt Lake
Mhm.
City. And if you look out our windows and out on our deck, you can't see any other houses. You just see the big mountain, green mountain forest, and a part of
Yeah.
it's forest land up on the other side. And then the other part is we have a place that we go to up in the Uintas that again backs onto national forest, and so we are surrounded by nature
Mhm.
and open space, and that gives me a lot of joy. Where I live gives me a
Yeah.
lot of joy.
Well, and there's a lot of research that indicates it's healthy to be out in
Yeah,
nature. That's
yeah.
that's good for you. Okay, so my next one is kind of last week we said one thing that brings me pure joy is seeing a dog with a head out the window. It just makes me
Yeah.
so happy because that dog just looks so happy. And as I thought about it, it's really just dogs. I mean, I love dogs and they bring me so much happiness and joy. If I see a dog, I
But
cannot resist asking to say hi to someone's
but you
dog.
don't have a dog.
Exactly.
So I thought about you on the way home, because on the
Uh-huh.
way home, this car pulls out of, I guess, just a house or a street. 3 dogs sticking their head, because on the way up to through Immigration Canyon past the zoo, there is a park, a dog park that a lot
Mhm.
of people go to. So you often see dogs hanging out the windows, going
Yep.
up Sunnyside Avenue past the zoo. And there were 3. I don't know. It just seemed really crowded to me, but
So
and I thought
I
Liz would love to see those dogs.
I would. I do. I love saying hi to dogs. And Curtis he likes dogs. He likes other people's dogs. He
Uh-huh.
doesn't he cannot stand the idea of his house smelling like dog. And that's his biggest thing is why he refuses to get a dog.
Yeah.
Anyways, which is fine with me. I'm so busy anyways. I don't have time for a dog. I mean, my life is full enough. So I get derive so much joy and happiness from saying hi to other people's dogs. And so I get
Yeah.
this fix.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. And so, dogs, they really just I mean, because most dogs, like 8 out of 10 dogs you meet are just so happy and just want to love
Yeah.
everybody. And
Yeah.
it just makes me happy. It just brings me joy.
Yeah. We have a yellow lab right now.
Yeah.
She's just wonderful.
Yeah, they're so happy. Okay, give me your
Is
next
it my
one.
turn?
Yes.
Okay. Travel. I
Okay.
realize a lot of this, I'm very privileged and lucky
Yeah.
to live the life that I do. But as I look back on my life with with Lindy and the children, we've been very lucky and privileged to be able to travel to some very wonderful places with them. And I think what makes it wonderful is that we all get along. Like the trips are really wonderful because it's an extension of the first one, which is
Mhm.
this family relationship. And I like being with them. And so
Mm.
to do trips with them, in a place that's somewhat different and exciting and new for everyone. It's not stressful at all.
Okay, that's
It's
good. Yeah.
There's no stress involved with it, and it's just very, very enjoyable. And so
Okay.
I love doing that. We don't do it as much now because of mostly because of the grandkids and school and things like
Yeah.
that. Before the kids were married and like still in college, we used to go quite a bit on really some fun trips.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I mean, just different. We love novelty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so my next one, you're not going to be at all surprised by. You probably were expecting cycling.
Bike riding.
Bike
Okay,
riding.
cycling.
Oh, yes.
Cycling. Okay.
Yes. I mean, just the joy and the freedom that it
Mhm.
brings, and just, and I think a lot of it just stems from the sense of accomplishment too.
Mhm.
I think I get a
Yeah.
lot of joy and satisfaction out of that, of just being able to look back and see how far I've come. Because I mean, cycling is something that I fell in love with it, and I've worked very hard, right? I've worked very, very hard in this sport, and I'm very dedicated to it. And so I think it just brings me, joy and happiness to be able to look at that and say, I worked hard and I've accomplished something.
Yeah. But there's also physiological things that
Yes.
happen when you're
Oh,
riding
yeah.
bikes, that as hard as you probably do. And for an extended period of time, because you go on some very long bike rides. And so
Hmm.
physiologically, it's going to increase your sense of well-being. I mean,
Oh,
it
yeah.
really does. So that makes total sense to me. Yeah.
Endorphins are my drug.
Yeah. There you go.
Like it.
I mean, that's what you're getting. When
Oh, yeah.
I treat cyclists who are runners, they all
Hmm.
say the same thing. And
Yeah.
we talk about, they talk about being in the zone, which
Hmm.
I've never done anything that, I can imagine what that is like. But for them, it's really, really important. It's meditative in
Yes.
a lot of ways for them.
Hmm.
So
Well,
that totally makes sense.
yeah, it takes a fair amount of mental discipline
Hmm.
to be able to maintain those high speeds for
Yeah.
that amount
Oh,
of
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So,
Focus too. Yeah.
yeah, well, and to keep your heart rate up that high, and
Hmm.
so especially when you're low, when your resting heart rate is very low, as athletes often are, getting it up and maintaining it up into the 160s, or
Takes a lot of work.
it does. It does.
Hmm.
It takes a lot of work. It's
Yeah.
very hard. So,
Yeah.
okay.
My next one is that's maybe surprising. I'm a real introvert,
Mm-hmm.
and I like quiet time.
Mm.
And my life is such that right now I have an opportunity for quiet time. Every morning is quiet time, typically for me, except when you and I, record at 6:30 my time.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But usually I get up fairly early, between 5 and 5:30, and then I'll spend at least an hour and a half with quiet time on my own, and I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so I appreciate that. It makes me happy.
Yeah,
It
it
sets
brings.
it sets the tone for me for the whole day. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and this isn't on my list, but I guess the flip side of that, or how I recharge, is group activities.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
because you're a classic extrovert.
I really am, and so the idea of just the idea of knowing there was a social event that I could have gone to and I had to miss out for some reason,
Hmm.
that's hard for me.
Makes you very unhappy, probably.
It does make me very unhappy, but it
Yeah,
just, that is a way that I can, it's recharging my batteries. And that is
yeah,
classic introvert
yeah,
extrovert. Introverts
yeah.
recharge their batteries by being alone.
Hmm.
Extroverts recharge just through socializing.
Right, right.
Okay, so my final one, it kind of fits in, I guess, with family, but cuddling. Man, do
Oh,
I just, yes, I mean, cuddling, it really just brings me true joy. So one of the ways that I used to do self-care, I've talked about this before, is eating a bowl of really cold cereal and then
uh-huh.
curling up in an electric blanket. Well, sometimes I'll go crawl in bed with Curtis, who's still asleep and really warm. And so, but just cuddling. I love to cuddle with Curtis, or if my kids come snuggle with me when my kids fall asleep on me,
Uh-huh.
so cuddling, it makes me so, so happy. And I get all the endorphins from that
Hmm.
comforting physical touch. I absolutely love
Oxytocin.
that. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. My last one is work. And Lindy and
Okay.
I were talking about it the other day, that we are incredibly fortunate to be able to do something that we really love.
Hmm.
I mean, you can't help everyone in doing
Yeah.
this work, but you can help a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that idea of having purpose, having a vocation that has meaning
Mm-hmm.
is really important. And I just feel very lucky to be able to, I feel lucky that I'm self-employed. I work for myself and I love that.
Yeah.
And so I get to set the schedule the way I want, but it's something that's very meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of people when they get to be my age would think about retiring, and we've talked about it, and neither one of us want to. We can keep going for quite a few more years and probably will. And
Yeah.
we may cut down to 2 days, or you never
Mm-hmm.
know, but I feel very lucky and it makes me happy.
Yeah, and I can say the same thing. I mean, I'm technically self-employed, but my schedule and my day is ran by three little tyrants.
Yeah.
But I mean, as hard as parenting is, I mean, I do derive a lot of true joy. I mean, most little girls, or you see a lot of little girls, they dream about, their wedding day and just being a princess and all of that. Well, for me, I was always more interested in being a mom. I couldn't wait to have kids. I couldn't wait to be pregnant. I really freaked my mom out when I was younger because I used to pretend to be pregnant. I'm watching.
I can see how she might worry about that.
Really freaked her out. But I loved the roundness of the pregnant bellies and just that special glow. Like it was, I loved pregnant people and I loved seeing pregnant people and watching movies of pregnant people because I love pregnancy. And so, it was really special to me when I was finally able to experience that and be a mom. But boy, did it freak my mom out. Okay, so I hope everybody enjoyed this week's episode.
Here's the takeaway. I always like takeaways.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention to what it is that makes you happy.
Yes.
And if you can, do more of that.
Yeah.
Take it as information. It's good information.
Yeah.
And there's something about whatever it is that's making you happy that's important.
Yeah. So, Mark and I, we've had about a week to reflect on this. Right. And to really think about what makes us happy. So do the same thing. I mean, I think that's something I would encourage our listeners to do is take some time and write down your top 5. Yeah. Find, your top 5 things that make you happy.
Because it ties, as you said at the start, it ties right into last week's gratitude. I mean, I'm grateful for all these things. Yeah.
And I think it's especially important if you've got some genuine unhappiness going on in your life, because that certainly does happen. I mean, I think of somebody who has lost a loved one recently, or maybe they just lost a job, or there's just some sort of major turmoil going on in your life. That's really hard. And, I think that's the most important time to find joy and to find what does make you happy so you can seek more of it.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So next week, we are going to get into why families matter. And we're going to come at this from kind of several different angles. We could probably just really call the episode Family because, I mean, we're going to talk about several different things. I mean, it's probably going to be a little bit of an evolving topic. So it might be a little bit different because some of the things we want to talk about is, this idea that you can create your own family as an adult. And we're also going to mention the fact that sometimes you need to set boundaries and why boundaries are healthy with family. So it's going to be a good episode.
Okay. Have a good week, everyone.
Bye, guys. Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.